Hello, this is Joe Folkman from Zinger Folkman, and today I'd like to talk to you about leadership speed. And we're going to define what that is and give you some insights into our research, but my focus on this topic is to help you to think about what you could do to increase your speed. But I don't want you to do that by running harder or breaking a sweat. We're going to suggest ways you can increase your speed without breaking a sweat. So the first question we'd like to pose is, does speed of execution matter? Now, I remember when I was in the third grade, and my teacher got up one day, and she said, in the future, people are going to work a lot less. They're going to have a lot more leisure time. In fact, people will work 3 hours a day. Now, her saying that came from an article that was written by John Maynard Keynes. He was an economist. He lived in London. But John Maynard Keynes looked at automation. He looked at what was happening with technology. And intuitively, he just saw the possibility that all this labor that we use to make products in the future, people would require a lot less labor. And his intuition was we'd just have people work less but make the same amount of money. This might not surprise any of you, but that did not happen. In fact, the opposite has happened. What we see as we look at working and labor and the number of hours that people work is that the reverse has happened. And clearly in Mexico, I see a significant increase in the number of hours that people work and their tensions that way. A few years ago, I was working with a large university. They were an Ivy League school, and one of the people in the program said, "Things are different here." I said, "What's different here?" And he started to say, "Well, our endowment's been cut in half, and so they've reduced the workforce, and they're asking us to do more with less." And I kind of smiled because I said, "Welcome to the real world." All of my clients are expected to do more with less. In fact, most organizations have realized that the number one cost factor in that organization are the people costs. And so organizations are always looking for a way to do more with less. Well, one of the reasons for that is the population is aging. We've actually found head counts in countries like Germany, Italy, Japan, and Russia, where you look at the employee head counts, they're reducing, and the number of people that are older versus the number of people who are younger. We're seeing a more of a shift in population. There's more older than younger. And so if you think about that and how you can support this aging workforce, you've got to be able to do more with less and be more efficient. The other thing you've probably noticed, and I've certainly noticed in my life, is the pace of change seems to be increasing. And we looked at some data that really accentuated that kind of issue. We found a study where we looked at the number of communications per year per executive. And what we found is if you look at the number of messages in the 1970s that an executive dealt with a year, it was about 1,000 messages a year. That was basically snail mail. It was basically mail and envelopes, typed letters. In the 1980s, that went up to 4,000. In the 90s, 9,000. In 2000, it's 25,000. And in 2010, it's around 30,000 messages a year. If you take that 30,000 and divide it by the average number of work days per year, that's about 150 messages a day. And for a lot of people, when you think about your email and what goes into your email box and different kind of communications and voicemail, and we've found so many creative ways to get you more messages per year, that sounds about right. That's about the number of messages that people have to deal with every day. We ask a question in a poll, and those of you that did the pre-assessment were asked this question. I feel that the pace of change is increasing, and people could agree or respond neutral to that or disagree. What we found is 81% of our respondents when in this survey that we've done with over 4,000 people agreed with that statement, that they feel, yes, the pace of change is increasing. We then ask, I feel that I'm often expected to move faster and do more. And again, agree, disagree, neutral. Well, on that, 72% agreed with that statement. So the pace of change is increasing, and we're expected to do more. The question comes up, does speed alone make leaders more effective? If you just move faster, if you're quicker, is that the key to being effective there? And so we did a little study. Well, it wasn't a little study. We actually gathered data on 51,137 leaders in our global 360 database. And what we did is we looked at leaders who were good at doing things fast or doing things right, okay? And we wanted to test that out to see which one of those was more important. And so we looked at the most effective leaders. We looked at the best leaders in our database, those at the 90th percentile. And if a leader was at the 75th percentile or higher on doing things fast, but below that on doing things right, we found there was a 2% chance that you were a great leader, that you were in the 90th percentile as a leader. So, boy, doing things fast alone didn't seem to be very helpful. So then we looked at doing things right. Well, surely this is going to be better. I mean, so we looked at the leaders who were below the 75th percentile on doing things fast, but at or above the 75th percentile on doing things right. And we said, what were the best leaders looked like that did that? And we found there were 3%, only 1% better. But then we looked at this magical combination. If you were effective at doing things fast and doing things right, now, do the math here. You'd expect 5%, but actually you got 96%. In other words, 96% of the best leaders in our database, those at the 90th percentile or higher, were very good at moving quickly and getting things done right. And so our definition of speed actually is, speed is defined as a leader's ability to execute quickly and correctly. Doing things fast isn't what your boss expects and your job expects. Your job expects you to get things done quickly, but right. And that's the expectation, and that's really what we measured when we looked at this. And so our question was, we started to look at the data, and we wondered what the effect would be of leadership speed. And again, that's defined as fast and right. So we looked at leaders below the 75th percentile on their speed rating, and then we looked at the percentile on overall leadership effectiveness. In other words, how effective you were as a leader. So leaders who were below the 75th percentile on speed, their average leadership effectiveness was at the 40th percentile. Now, percentiles, the way that works is it shows you the distribution, and basically that means that they were 10 points below average. Average would be the 50th percentile, or at least the median. Now, then we looked at leaders in the top quartile on speed. People that moved very quickly, they were at the 75th percentile or faster on that speed rating and doing things right. And when we looked at their overall leadership effectiveness, it was at the 83rd percentile. Wow. When we first found that, we just realized, boy, that makes an enormous difference. That your effectiveness as a leader in terms of speed really had a tremendous impact on how you were viewed as a leader. So the next question we said, well, what's it like to work for a fast leader, for a speedy leader? Would you love it or would you hate it? Would you enjoy working for a leader who got things done quickly, who made things happen, who kept things moving along? Or would you rather work for somebody who moved kind of slowly, meetings went along slowly? Well, my guess is you're guessing what the answer to that is, because when we looked at employee engagement and when we broke out the speed ratings by the bottom 10%, the next 25%, the middle 30%, the next 25%, and the top 10%, what you see is this tremendous increase in engagement. Now, engagement really measures how satisfied am I with my job? Do I want to quit or do I want to stay? Am I willing to do more work? Would I recommend this organization as a place to work? Those kinds of questions. And on all those questions, we saw a tremendous increase. So the faster the leader, the more engaged the employees. Turns out that people really loved working for a leader who moved quickly. I remember when I worked for a leader once who moved very quickly. And, things were a little disorganized and sometimes we didn't know what was happening, but it was sure fun. We got a lot done and we always felt like things were happening. And then I remember working for another leader that moved very slowly and meetings dragged along. Things didn't get done. It just seemed hard. And I felt that difference too when I was working for those two kinds of leaders. Well, what else is the effect of speed? We've showed you the impact on overall leadership effectiveness. But what about your performance rating? If you were a leader who moved fast, would you be more likely to get the highest performance rating or less likely? Well, again, we broke out that speed, that your leader's effectiveness on speed, and then we looked at the percentage of leaders that received the highest performance rating, far exceeds goals. And we found out that if you were in the bottom 10% on speed, so very ineffective, only 13% of those leaders got that highest performance rating. But if you were in the top 10%, 74% of those leaders got the top performance rating. And so what that means is that if you move quickly, you're much more likely to be in line for a raise or a promotion. I think that's a good thing. Now, as we looked at speed, we kept looking at it and we said, surely there's a downside to speed. Surely there's a point at where you're moving too fast and people get caught up. And so we looked at this engagement index, and then we measured people at various points on their speed rating. This is kind of like a speedometer from 0 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour. And you can see the average, the first to the 50th, the average percentile, people were at the 41st percentile on engagement. And then the 51st to 75th, the 53rd percentile, 76th to 85th, 61st, and then the 86th to 95th, 67th. Now we're getting 95th, 96th percentile, 73rd, it goes up. 97th percentile, that is really fast. It goes up again, 74th. 98th percentile, it goes up again, 75th. 99th percentile, 81st. 100th percentile, 83rd. We were really shocked. There's no downside to speed. And again, speed is always defined as doing things fast and doing things well, but it doesn't appear that there's any downside, any kind of negative effects for speed, and especially in today's environment, that's very important. We thought it'd be interesting to look at different functions in an organization and the average speed rating for leaders in those functions. What we found when we looked at that data was that sales and customer service, general management, legal, these were the leaders who moved the fastest. We also found that the leaders that tended not to move as fast, HR, clerical, safety. Now, you understand a lot of these things. In some of those functions, like safety, they're telling people don't run. Get things done right. And so there's some trade-offs with speed, and we're going to explore that as we look at the speed assessment a little bit. Now, we were able to find a way to measure speed, and you got the opportunity before this webinar to fill out this PACE assessment. And hopefully you've got your results there. If you do, I'd like you to pull those out, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. The PACE assessment basically has 15 pairs of items, and it identifies your preference for a slower or a faster pace, but it also measures quality and patience. And so on that assessment, you have paired comparisons, two different items. And for instance, on decision making, you could choose between I make decisions quickly and move on. That's what I like to do. I'd prefer to take the time to weigh the pros and cons of decisions and consider alternatives. There's not a right or wrong answer to that, but what that does is it shows you your preference for either moving quickly or taking the time to really weigh things out. And if you say, well, what's the best answer there? It depends on what you're doing, and it depends on the decision, but it does get at your preference. So this is the PACE assessment. That's how we calculated that score. We also were able to measure speed using a 360 assessment. Now, on the 360 assessment, that's where you get feedback from your boss, your peers, your direct reports, and others. And actually, the Extraordinary Leader 360 assessment, we can calculate a speed index on that from 3 items. One item talks about spots problems or trends early. Another one quickly responds to problems. And a third one, a person quickly makes needed changes, has the courage to do that. So when we looked at these 2 assessments, we found that there was a 0.5 correlation between the PACE self-assessment and the 360 assessment. And for a self-assessment, that is an extraordinarily high correlation. These are a very predictive survey. Now, on your PACE assessment, we also had self-ratings, self-evaluations of activities. And we correlated the PACE score with these self-assessments on activities. And we found that the correlation there was 0.52, but I looked at the data just from Mexico, and it was 0.53. It was even stronger. And the correlates, the activities that correlated the strongest in Mexico to having a fast pace is your speed at which you understand problems, the speed at which you take a test, getting work done, making decisions, reading, holding a meeting. These were all high correlates to a fast pace. Now, on your results, if you look at your results, what you'll see is we have scales, and they range on the pace scale from slow pace to a fast pace. And you can see the quartile, the 25th percentile, that's the bottom quartile, the 50th percentile, and the 75th percentile, and then you can see where your score is. So you can judge yourself relative to people in in the normative base, which is a global sample of data from around the world. So we do measure a pace, and you can see if you have a slow pace or a faster pace. And you can also see your comparison on 2 other indices, quality versus quantity, okay? Are you more focused around getting things done right and making sure things are done correctly? Or are you more focused on quantity of work, getting a lot done, getting a lot accomplished at once? And the last scale measures patience. If you look at my PACE score, I have a fairly high PACE score, and I am a quantity-focused person, and I have no patience. I checked with my wife on that, and that's true. So you can see where you are, and obviously, if you're in a job that requires a high focus on quality, your PACE score is going to be slower. And if you have a lot of patience, your PACE score is going to be slower. And I can't say that that's not a good thing. It's probably a good thing to have more patience. I looked at the data from Mexico that I'd gathered, And what we found is there was about the same range in the scores that we find in every other country. People move faster and move slower, and you can see the the pace scores, the speed exactly, ranged from a minus 4.3 to a plus 4.3, but the mean score for Mexico is the blue, and it's about a 0.5, so it's a little bit above zero. What's interesting is the quality, and you can see there's actually a significant difference in the quality focus in Mexico. And that's really explains why your speed score is a little slower. You can see that on average, you're 0.2 compared to the average of 0.9 on quality. So people in Mexico tend to be a little more quality focused, but you have about the same level of patience as everybody else, which, it's on the impatient side of that. And so that's kind of where the norms are at. This score gives you your sense of how you're doing on your pace. And a lot of people that have taken this survey, they get very interested in it, and they wonder how others in their group might do. And if you'll talk to Yolanda, she could do a little assessment for your group, and you could see where your group comes out on this pace assessment. But it's an interesting measurement, but it gives you a kind of a pretty good sense of where you are in terms of your pace. So as we talk to most people about their pace and about where they're at, regardless of how fast their pace is, everybody says the same thing. They feel there is pressure to pick up their pace. Our intuitive approach to do this is oftentimes not very useful. So when a leader thinks about how do I increase my leadership speed, they come up with some pretty good ideas. Like, for instance, they say, well, in order to increase my leadership speed, I'll just talk faster. And if I talk faster, that'll help. Or they say, I'll run everywhere. I'll run up and down the halls at the office. I'll run into meetings. I'll run out. That will help pick up my pace. Here's another way. I'll eliminate all small talk. No small talk. Any of those side conversations, I will just eliminate them. I'll just cut people off. Or I'll just go around and tell people, you should be able to do that in 5 minutes. The reason I put that last one on is that's my favorite thing to say at work, and people laugh at me a lot because it takes longer than 5 minutes. Now, what's interesting about that is those activities would make you tired and frantic and annoying. And what we found is they don't help you to move faster. In fact, all they do is make you more annoying and frantic, and I don't think that helps you become a better leader. So what does help you? How can you increase your pace? And I know there's a lot of times when you go to a summit like this and you look at information and you tend to look at it objectively and you say, well, I'm just kind of looking at the information. What I challenge you to do on this information is look for something you can do to help you increase your pace. And so what we did is we looked at data from 728,000 raters of 51,937 leaders. And that's a huge database of employees. But what we looked for is the leaders who moved quickly, who were rated at the top level on speed, and those who were not very effective on speed. And we looked at what behaviors led to a leader moving quickly. And what we find is these behaviors create leverage without making you frantic and annoying. And so we found 8 behaviors, and what we call these is companion behaviors. And in the Ziegler-Folkman approach to building strengths, this is the technology we use for how a leader can build a strength. Typically, people use that linear approach. They just become more frantic and they just use a linear approach. And this is called the nonlinear approach to development. And in our leadership training, we teach people how to build strengths. And so I know your pace is pretty good right now. What this gives you is how I could become better. How I could take something I'm pretty good at and make it better. Now, I'm going to talk about these 8 companion behaviors. My challenge to you is that you find 1 or 2 of these that you might be able to improve on. And then we have some follow-up materials to help you to actually create a development plan and work on your personal improvement for becoming a more speedy leader. The first one of the companion behaviors is innovation. Now, several years ago, I used to work with a colleague, Nigel. Nigel was one of the hardest working, smartest guys I knew. And one day, Nigel and I were at lunch, and Nigel and I were talking about the stupid voicemail system. And Nigel goes on and I says, I hate the voicemail system. I just hate it. I said, why do you hate it? Well, Nigel said, whenever I hear a message, and you've probably noticed this, and somebody gives me their phone number, all of a sudden they talk faster and they mumble. And I can't catch the number. And so I have to replay the entire message again from the beginning and listen to that whole message. And they only give me the number at the end of the message. And I have to replay it again. I waste 5 minutes or 8 minutes or however long that message is to hear that stupid number again. And sometimes I have to hear it 3 times. Now, as I looked at Nigel, my mouth went open and I said, don't you use the 7 button? And he says, what, the 7 button? What's that? I said, well, the 7 button, it makes the voicemail back up about 5 seconds. He goes, really? Yes. And Nigel said, I didn't know that. And Nigel says, I have wasted days listening to stupid messages because I didn't know about the 7 button. I did, and I didn't waste days of time listening to a message again. It's interesting when I think about this and I think about Nigel, I think about how many things in technology I don't know, how many things about a new technology, and I've watched people where they do things in Outlook and they post things in and they set reminders for themselves. I watch what my kids do with technology, and they've really they figured out how to harness it, how to use it to their advantage, how to take advantage of it, and how to really make things easier, quicker, simpler. And there's always a better way. There's always a way to do things quicker, simpler, and easier. And the question is, what keeps you from finding a better way? Sometimes we get stuck in a rut. And we just do it the same way we used to do it because we get stuck in that rut, and our brain is like we can't jump out of that rut. And, using innovation can be a great way to increase your speed. There's always a better way. All right, the second companion behavior is clear strategy and direction. Now, when I was 12, I used to work for my uncle, and my uncle had a farm. One day, he told me to get in the truck, and I got in the truck, and he drove me out to this field. And at the end of the field, there was a Caterpillar tractor, and one of those tractors with the tracks on it, and it was a big honking thing. It was a diesel. And he looked at me and he said, you're going to plow. And I was 12 years old, and I didn't even know how to drive, but he said, I'm going to plow. And I'm like, yes. And so he got me, and I stood on the back of the tractor, and he says, let me show you how this works. So he taught me how to start it. It had something called glow plugs. You had to warm up the plugs, and then you pushed the starter, and the thing started up, and it roared, And then he took me up one side of the field, and he turned around and he came back the other side, and he gave me a lot of instructions. But the instruction that he repeated the most was, he said, now, Joe, you've got to plow straight, and you've got to keep the edge of that Caterpillar tractor 2 inches from the furrow. And I said, okay, all right, Uncle Chet, I will do that. So he got on the back, and I got in the driver's seat. And, on a Caterpillar tractor, you don't have a steering wheel. You have you have two levers, and it holds the track back or pushes it forward. And so I leaned over and I looked at that one track, and I looked at where it was relative to the furrow, and I would just worked really hard, and I was moving the track back and forth, but I tried to keep it 2 inches away from that furrow. And then he let me go up the entire length of that field. And when I got to the end of that field, he says, "All right, Joe, stop. Now, okay, put it in neutral, turn around and look back." And I looked back, and guess what I saw? I saw the most wonderful S. I mean, I had been moving that thing. I've tried to adjust it back and forth, and I just, it wasn't straight at all. And what happens when it's not straight is it makes plowing really hard because you've got to keep moving the tractor back and forth. He says, look, this is going to take all year if we don't have a straight line. You've got to learn to plow straight. And he says, so I'm going to teach you a secret. And I said, all right, I'm willing to learn. And so we got to the end of the field. He said, look down to the other end of the field. And I looked down, and he said, you see that fence post right in front of you? And I go, yeah, I see that fence post. He said, aim for the fence post. Don't look down, aim for the fence post. Look forward and just keep your eye on that fence post and aim for the fence post. And what I found is that when I aimed for the fence post, I could plow straight. What's interesting about strategy is it helps us to plow straight. It helps us keep a straight line. It helps the organization to not deviate, not go in 5 different directions. It helps us to kind of stay on that straight and narrow. And I've found that is a great analogy for having a clear strategy. When strategy isn't clear, things get slow. Things get slow because people go in different directions. People don't know exactly what to do next. They don't see the end goal. And so you need to learn how to keep people focused on that strategy, and you do that by communicating regularly, by keeping people focused and keeping their vision on that fence post, on that goal, on that objective, on that vision of what we're trying to do. There's a lovely Chinese proverb, and it says, the man who chases 2 rabbits catches neither one. And oh, that's so true. When we chase 2 rabbits, we don't catch either one. So the second way you can become, again, a speedier leader is by having real clear strategy and vision and then sharing that strategy with others regularly. The third way talks about courage. In the U.S., we have these water parks, and there's this fun ride in the water park called the Lazy River. I don't know if you've ever been to the Lazy River, but the way it works is you get an inner tube, you get on the Lazy River, and you sit in the tube, and you just ride it around, and you're just sitting in the tube, and you're being lazy. Now, for a lot of people, they think about work much like the Lazy River. They come to work in the morning, they get on their tube, they ride it around all day. At 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever they quit, they get off the tube and they go home. Well, what I've found is that oftentimes to increase speed, people need to take a bit more difficult path. They need to go against the current. They need to go upstream. And as you think about having the courage and the people that have the courage to push against that current, to try something different, to do something new, that's what makes people faster, and that's one of the key characteristics of leaders with speed. The fourth way that we increase speed is with this competency called stretch goals. I had my nephew that was staying with me. He's a film student, and he was making a full-length film. It was his springboard for his career. He wanted to get accepted to Stanford University. And when he came to stay with me, I said, well, how long will it take you to get this film finished? And he said, 6 months. And this was in October, and I said, what would happen if you got this finished, if you set a goal to finish this by December? And he said, well, that'd really be helpful because then I could revise it. I could show it to people. I could make changes. If I take 6 months, that's exactly when it needs to be done to have it submitted for graduate school. And I said, well, I challenge you. And to my surprise, he said, okay. Now, he'd set a pace that was reasonable for him, that didn't push him too hard, that allowed him to go on dates and have fun and enjoy life. And when I challenged him to do it faster, he started to think about, well, what would it take to do that? What's fascinating is that he did finish that by December. He finished it by December 25th. He had to work all night, but he got it finished right before Christmas. And it was interesting because all it took was that willingness to accept a stretch goal. It's interesting. We have a kind of a paradox about satisfaction and effort. I mean, when we set a stretch goal for people, some people are really resistant to that. And I mean, if you ask people what would make them happy, oftentimes they'll say, well, I'd like a break, less work, a vacation, a little beach time. That's what would make me happy. I mean, just some time off and less stress and more vacation, right? But when you really look at the experiences that build satisfaction, engagement, and increased discretionary effort, what it is challenging assignments, accomplishing difficult tasks, making significant contributions, making the impossible possible. When people do those kinds of things, that's what's memorable. And when you think about what makes your life satisfying, what makes your life worth living, it's these things that you've done that take a lot of effort, that where you accomplish something that nobody else could do, where you do the impossible and make it possible. And so what's fascinating is that for most employees, if you say, what am I going to do to make my employees happy? You kind of say, well, give them a break, a little less work, more vacation. But I'm saying to you, if you really want to make them satisfied and engaged, get them to do something significant, something huge. Set a stretch goal. Now, I don't think you ought to abuse them or take advantage of them. But when people do something meaningful and different that no one else could do, they've never felt more alive and they've never felt more important. Another way of helping you to increase your speed is by communicating powerfully. Several years ago, I got my new iPhone, and Siri was part of that new iPhone, and I was learning how to use Siri. And someone had told me that if you pick up your phone and you bring up Siri and you say, tell, that will send a text message. So I wanted to test that. So I brought up my phone, and Siri came up and said, how can I help you? And so I said to Siri, tell Laura I love her. Laura's my wife. And so Siri asked a question. It was a good question. Which Laura? Now, there were like 5 Lauras in my contacts, and I didn't want to send that message to only one of them. And so I said, Laura Folkman. And so Siri came up and it said, message sent. I was very proud of myself. I was smiling. I thought, wow, that is so cool. So here's the message I sent to my wife. I love her. Oops. Here's the message I received from my wife back. You love who? Well, all right. I did not communicate well. So often when we try to communicate to others, when we try to really send clear messages, they don't receive it. And as you know, that slows things down. When people don't know what they're doing, how they're doing it, where they're doing it, they slow down. When you don't know what's going on, you slow down. In fact, the number one objection for most managers when challenged to improve their communication is they tell me they just don't have time. They're too busy. There's too much to do, and they can't take the time to communicate more clearly. Now, my partner, Jack Zenger, he is brilliant. And one of the things he's tried to do in his life is do something around managing brief interactions. His belief is, and my testimonial is, you can have very meaningful, very important, brief interactions with others. They don't have to take a long time. And I found in Mexico that most interactions take about twice as long as most of the interactions in the U.S. And I think that's because of your lovely culture, how you treat each other. But I'm just always amazed at how long it takes to do some pretty simple things like check into a hotel. It just seems like it's more complicated than it should be. So I'm going to talk to you about how do you have brief interactions. And I think you can do that. And I think you can do it in Mexico. So you start that interaction by setting expectations. Now, if somebody walks into your office and you sit back in your chair and you look like you've got all day, they'll take it. If you sit back in your chair and you say, I only have a few minutes, they'll start to craft a message that only lasts a few minutes. So set an expectation that this is going to be quick. Now, pick up the pace if you're in the driver's seat. So if people are, meandering and going here and there in the conversation, direct them back. Do it gently, do it kindly, but direct them back. And gently guide others when they initiate the meeting. And so, again, it's this gentle guidance. It's keeping people on track. It's doing it gently, not abruptly, but just keeping them on track and trying to keep focused on, so where are we going and what do you want and how are we going to get there? One of the things that's, I think, critical, and one of the things that is the worst thing to do in a brief interaction is to not listen. And this is completely wrong, because if you don't listen, people walk away frustrated and angry. But you don't have to take a long time. I was with a group of people recently, and I said, have you ever had an incredible, meaningful conversation with another person where they really listened to what you had to say and they really understood you? And, they'd raise their hand. And I'd say, how long did that take? Average time, 15 minutes. It wasn't 2 hours or 3. It was 15 minutes. And so I implore you, listen carefully, listen actively as they're going along and guide that conversation, but really, really, really try to understand what it is, what's their point of view, what are they trying to say. You ought to think about scheduling shorter meetings. Most organizational theorists assume or know that most organizations spend at least 15% of the man hours in every company in meetings. And my question for you, what would happen if you shortened every meeting by 15 minutes? What would happen to your work group? How would people feel? I'm sure no one would hate it. I am sure no one would be disgusted. Now, if you shorten it abruptly and you miss important things, well, they might. But I just think if you plan to shorten that meeting by 15 minutes, you move things along quickly, it's going to be a better meeting. And then move staff and team meetings along briskly. If you do that, you're going to be a great communicator, but you're also going to be quick. The next way, the next companion behavior is an external focus. Now, I have a canyon by my house. I love to ride my bike up the canyon. And as I'm riding up that canyon, I'm huffing and puffing. But in my mind, I am going as fast as any human could ever go. I just think I'm just whipping up that canyon until somebody passes me. And then I realize I'm crawling. Without an external perspective, it's difficult for us to realize our actual performance. And an external perspective helps us become aware of the competition. We recognize that other organizations are creating competitive advantage. We see how our products and services compare. So that external perspective helps us have speed because we see others going faster and we want to keep up. The next companion behavior is around taking initiative. If you think about a rocket, like a spaceship, and it takes most of the fuel in that rocket to get 2 feet off the landing pad, just to get started. And for most of us, it takes most of our energy to get one of these things started. So, as you think about this whole idea of increasing speed, you've got to take initiative. People tend to wait for just the right moment, just the right time when they can make a difference. And I implore you, there's never a perfect time. So you've got to take the initiative and do it right now. There is a difference between males and females and their willingness to take initiative. And we've measured it here. This is a study we've done with 19,000 males and 10,000 females. And we've looked at your ability to take initiative. Females are significantly more positive around taking initiative than males. I'm not sure why this is. I had my wedding anniversary recently. My wife was talking to me, and she said to me, Joe, in the 35 years we've been married, you've never changed the toilet paper roll once. And I thought, my goodness, I must have done it by accident at least once. So I thought, gosh, she's not noticing my initiative. So after she told me that, I decided, I'd heard that great artists sign their work. So every time I changed that toilet paper roll, I'd sign it. This is lovingly changed by your husband. Now she knows I changed the toilet paper roll. So anyway, that's what you might have to do to help you take initiative. The last companion behavior is knowledge and expertise. Having deep knowledge makes everything fast. Knowing what to do. When we don't know what to do, everything moves slow. There's a great example of that. How long do you think it took to create prototypes for Gmail and for Google Glass? It took 1 day. 1 day. And I found on the internet, the prototype for what they put together for Google Glass. They had a notebook, and it was connected to a coat hanger. I love the coat hanger. This Pico projector, which is a really small projector, and then, plexiglass. But they threw something together and said, hey, it kind of works. Wonder if we could do this, You can do things quickly if you have deep expertise. Now, some of us don't. But the good news here is you don't need to have all the expertise in the world. You can rely on others' expertise. The smartest people I know work and have people that work for them that are really smart. And what do? They listen to them. They ask for their advice. They get their input. They get them to work together. They get that team to work together. You can be one of the smartest people in the world, and you can hire some of the smartest people in the world and take advantage of their knowledge. The dumbest thing you can do is not take advantage of the knowledge of the people around you. So, we've talked about these 8 companion behaviors to help you increase your speed. Now, my suggestion for you is that you look down that list and you think about which ones of those, and maybe think about a couple of those, that would help you increase your speed. There's a couple things I want you to consider. Number one, in your job, in your function right now, which one of those would help you or be the most beneficial to you in your function right now? The second thing I want you to think about is which one of those do you have passion for? Do you love doing? Do you enjoy? And if you can find something that is needed in your organization and you enjoy doing, that's a great formula for improvement. Now, Yolanda will share with you an output that we have that gives you developmental suggestions and ways for you to increase your speed and some specific things you can do to create an action plan. I strongly encourage you to do something to increase your speed. Remember the difference. Those who are below the 75th percentile on speed, average effectiveness, 43rd percentile. Those who are above or at the 75th percentile, 83rd percentile. There's a huge benefit for speed these behaviors help you to increase your speed. So one final thought as you're thinking about it. I came across this study. It was done at Princeton Divinity School, and it's called the Good Samaritan Study. Here's how the study worked. They got some of the divinity students together, and they gave them one of two assignments. They asked half of the students to prepare a sermon on the Good Samaritan. Of course, the sermon of the Good Samaritan was it was a person who was walking down the trail of the Samaritan. He found this poor person laying on the side of the road who was beat up and been robbed, and he stopped to help that person, right? He was a good Samaritan. Now, other people, priests and others, walked by. They did nothing, but the Good Samaritan stopped. And, of course, in Jerusalem at that time, the Samaritans weren't especially loved by the Jews. So that's the sermon of the Good Samaritan. Now, the other group was asked to do a sermon on another gospel topic. All right? So they were in a room. They were given the assignment to prepare a sermon, and then they were asked to go across campus to deliver this sermon to a group of students. Now, some of the people that were asked to prepare a sermon had a very short time to get all across campus. Other people had more time. And as they exited the room where they prepared the sermon, they exited into an alley. And in the alley, they found this man laying on the ground, groaning and moaning. All right? So the question is, who stopped? Who stopped to help the man? Was it the students that prepared the sermon on the Good Samaritan? Or was it the students that felt like they had more time? Well, it was the students that felt like they had more time. As you increase your speed, don't forget those who need help. Don't be in such a hurry that you won't stop to help people that really need it. So, good luck as you go through this process. I've been delighted to chat with you on this broadcast, and I'm excited to hear some questions from you later. Thanks so much.